Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel.
General Hospital. A shocking paternity twist emerges from Dalton's lab break-in. When secrets collide, Rocco's defiance leads to a life-changing discovery. The tension in Port Charles reached a boiling point when Professor Henry Hank Dalton caught 17-year-old Rocco Falconeri breaking into his laboratory at Port Charles University. What started as a tense confrontation over breaking and entering has spiraled into something far more explosive, a paternity revelation that could shatter Rocco's world and upend everything. His parents, Dante and Lulu, have worked to protect. The break-in that changed everything. The events unfolded during what was supposed to be a routine evening at PCU's research facility. Rocco, determined to expose what he believed was illegal animal testing occurring in Dalton's lab, joined his friends Danny Morgan and Charlotte Casadini in their mission. With the help of a stolen key fob, the teens managed to slip into the professor's laboratory, ready to gather evidence and bring the operation to a halt. The plan seemed sound: find the animals, document the abuse, and alert the authorities. But nothing in Port Charles ever goes according to plan. As Rocco and his friends searched through the lab's files and equipment, they soon realized something unexpected. There were no animals. The laboratory appeared to be empty of any living test subjects. Danny immediately wanted to abort the mission, his sense of caution heightened after recent legal troubles. But Rocco and Charlotte insisted on digging deeper, convinced there had to be something worth uncovering. "We didn't come this far for nothing," Rocco insisted, his jaw set with determination. "There's got to be something here." Their search proved premature. Within minutes, Rocco heard footsteps approaching. He quickly turned off the lights as Danny and Charlotte scrambled behind a glass display case. But there wasn't enough time for Rocco to join them. Trapped and thinking fast, Rocco made a split-second decision that would alter the course of his life. When Professor Dalton entered the lab, Rocco deliberately drew his attention by slamming a drawer, sacrificing his own safety to protect his friends. Dalton's eyes went wide with recognition and anger as he spotted the teenager he'd seen around town, the pool attendant who never tipped properly. Rocco's face flushed as he realized he'd been caught. "You're trespassing," Dalton said coldly, his voice barely contained rage. "And I'm having you arrested." Rocco stood his ground, his teenage idealism burning bright despite his precarious situation. "You're testing on animals," he accused. "I know what you're doing here, and I won't let you get away with it." But Dalton's denial was swift and unambiguous. "There are no animals here, kid. Now you're not just breaking and entering, you're making false accusations." The professor grabbed Rocco firmly by the collar and dragged him out of the laboratory, determined to press charges immediately. Laura's maternal instinct versus political ambition. The scene that followed played out at Port Charles University's debate hall, where Mayor Laura Collins was preparing for a crucial re-election debate against her opponent, Ezra Boyle. Tension was already high as she mentally prepared to defend her mayoral record and explain her controversial decisions, particularly her support for Police Commissioner Dante Falconeri, despite his questionable tenure. Laura was reviewing her talking points when the doors suddenly burst open. In walked Professor Dalton, his hand firmly gripping Rocco's arm, his face flushed with righteous indignation. "Mayor Collins," Dalton announced loudly, ensuring everyone could hear, "your grandson broke into my private laboratory at this university. I'm demanding that he be arrested for breaking and entering, trespassing, and making false accusations." The room fell silent. Laura's eyes widened in shock as she looked at Rocco, then back at Dalton. Her opponent, Ezra Boyle, couldn't help but smirk at this perfectly timed scandal dropping into his lap. But Laura is Laura, woman who has navigated far more treacherous political waters than this. She straightened her spine and stepped forward with quiet authority. "Let him go," she said firmly, her voice low but unmistakably commanding. "Excuse me," Dalton's grip tightened. "I said, let my grandson go," Laura repeated, this time with the full weight of her office behind her words. "And absolutely no one is arresting him." Rocco's face flushed with a mixture of shame and relief as his grandmother stood between him and the consequences of his actions. But Laura's sacrifice was clear to everyone watching. By protecting Rocco so publicly, she was potentially derailing her own re-election campaign. Her opponent was already making mental notes about using this incident against her. "You're protecting a criminal," Boyle interjected smoothly. "How can you expect Port Charles citizens to believe in the rule of law if the mayor herself protects lawbreakers, especially her own family?" Laura's jaw tightened, but she remained composed. "Family comes first," she said simply. "And I will always stand up for my grandson." The DNA test that changes everything. The real shock came later, after Rocco had been taken home and everyone assumed the incident was resolved. Professor Dalton, still fuming about his property being violated and his reputation being questioned, decided to document exactly what Rocco had disturbed in his laboratory. He began compiling a list of items that had been moved or searched through. While examining the lab more thoroughly, Dalton came across something unexpected: a biological sample storage unit. Among the files and samples, there was a specimen labeled with a date from years ago, along with the name Rocco Falconeri. More specifically, it was marked as a DNA sample collected during a routine health screening at General Hospital years back. Curious and concerned that his lab might have been storing biological materials without proper authorization, Dalton ran a quick comparison test, one that he'd been conducting on various samples as part of his research protocols. The results stopped him cold. His hands trembled as he stared at the screen. The DNA sample belonged to Rocco Falconeri, but according to the genetic markers, Rocco was not the biological son of Dante and Lulu Falconeri. Instead, the DNA profile matched Professor Henry Dalton himself. Dalton sank into his chair, his mind reeling. It was impossible. It had to be a mistake. Yet the results were unmistakable. The connection to Britt's past. As Dalton's initial shock gave way to desperate searching for answers, a horrifying possibility began to take shape. Years ago, before he'd even come to Port Charles, Britt Western had been an OBGYN with access to genetic materials and biological samples. The timeline matched. The possibility was there. Somehow, impossibly, Britt must have obtained his genetic material years ago, perhaps during a routine medical procedure, perhaps through some other means Dalton couldn't fathom. And when she'd stolen Lulu and Dante's embryo to implant in herself and give birth to Rocco, perhaps something had gone wrong. Perhaps Britt's own genetic material had been mixed up in the process, or perhaps she deliberately used Dalton's sperm instead of Dante's. The implications were staggering. Rocco Falconeri, the boy he'd just attempted to have arrested, was his biological son. Dalton sat alone in his laboratory for hours, processing this information. Everything he knew about his life, about his presence in Port Charles, suddenly seemed to shift on its axis. He had a son, a teenage son who was currently angry with him, who'd just been publicly defended by his grandmother against Dalton's own accusations. The professor realized he needed answers. He needed to confront Britt Westburn and demand the truth. But more than that, he needed to understand how this had happened and what it meant for Rocco. When Dalton finally gathered his courage and reached out to Britt, her reaction was mixed. She was shocked, genuinely shocked, that her biological material could have created this situation, or that Dalton had discovered the truth. "I didn't know," Britt said, her voice strained. "Believe me, if I had known. This changes everything." "Then tell me what happened," Dalton demanded. "Tell me exactly what you did and how my son ended up being raised by the Falconeris without knowing the truth." Britt took a deep breath and began to explain the complicated circumstances that had led to this moment. Years of medical decisions, stolen embryos, mixed up samples, and the kind of chaos that only General Hospital could generate. The road ahead. As the truth threatens to explode across Port Charles, multiple lives hang in the balance. Dante and Lulu must confront the possibility that their son isn't biologically theirs again. Rocco must grapple with learning that his biological father is the man he just attempted to expose for animal cruelty. And Dalton must decide what kind of father he wants to be to a son who barely knows him. Laura's political career may hang in the balance as well, depending on how this scandal unfolds. But for now, all that matters is the fact that a secret buried for years, tangled up in scientific samples and medical records, has finally come to light. In Port Charles, secrets have a way of surfacing when you least expect them. And sometimes they arrive with a DNA test result that changes everything. The question now is, what will happen when Rocco learns the truth? Next, Port Charles residents, brace yourselves for what could be the most treacherous assignment Jocelyn Jacks has ever undertaken. The WSB's latest mission demands she walk a razor's edge between family loyalty and national security, and the consequences of one misstep could destroy everything she holds dear. Brennan's ultimatum leaves no room for compassion. WSB Station Chief Jack Brennan has placed Jocelyn in an impossible position that would test even the most seasoned operative. His directive couldn't be clearer: infiltrate Lucas Jones's inner circle and exploit her familial connection to gather intelligence on the increasingly dangerous Jens Sidwell. The assignment itself is straightforward enough on paper, but the execution reveals layers of moral complexity that Brennan either doesn't care about or refuses to acknowledge. Lucas has recently become romantically entangled with Marco Rios, whose father happens to be the very crime lord the WSB desperately wants to take down. This relationship creates the perfect surveillance opportunity, providing a natural pathway to Sidwell's operations without raising suspicion. However, Jocelyn's instinctive response to protect her cousin clashed violently with her obligations as an agent during her initial briefing with Brennan. When Jocelyn pleaded with the station chief to allow her to warn Lucas about the danger lurking behind Marco's charming facade, Brennan's response was swift and merciless. He threatened her with arrest for treason if she breathed a single word of warning to her cousin. The weight of those words settled heavily on Jocelyn's shoulders as she realized the full scope of what she'd signed up for when she joined the WSB. This isn't just about surveillance anymore, it's about watching someone she loves walk straight into a lion's den while she smiles and pretends everything is perfectly safe. The impossible mission of subtle sabotage. Jocelyn's mind raced through alternative strategies after Brennan shut down her direct approach. If she couldn't explicitly warn Lucas about Marco's connections to organized crime, perhaps she could plant seeds of doubt about the relationship itself. Her initial plan seemed reasonable enough: suggest to Lucas that moving in together was happening too fast, that he should pump the brakes and give the relationship more time to develop naturally before making such a significant commitment. This strategy served dual purposes in Jocelyn's increasingly desperate thinking. First, it might slow Lucas's emotional investment in Marco, creating opportunities for him to notice red flags she couldn't point out directly. Second, and perhaps more importantly, it would keep Lucas away from Windermere and Sidwell's sprawling manor on Spoon Island, where the crime lord conducts his most sensitive business operations. If she could just keep Lucas at a safe distance from that fortress of criminal enterprise, maybe she could buy enough time for the WSB to bring Sidwell down before Lucas got pulled deeper into this dangerous world. Unfortunately, reality has a way of crushing even the most well-intentioned plans. Lucas isn't just casually dating Marco, he's genuinely falling for him. More pressingly, Lucas desperately needs a new living situation, and Marco's generous offer to move into the Sidwell estate solves that practical problem while allowing their relationship to flourish. Any suggestion from Jocelyn that they're moving too quickly won't just fall on deaf ears. It'll come across as judgmental interference from a younger cousin who doesn't understand adult relationships. Lucas has already dismissed concerns from other family members, and Jocelyn's veiled warnings won't carry any more weight, especially when she can't explain the real reasons behind her hesitation. Navigating the Windermere minefield. The situation grows exponentially more complicated now that Lucas has committed to moving into Windermere. Jocelyn understands the risks of setting foot in Sidwell's domain better than almost anyone. The manor on Spoon Island has a dark history even before Sidwell took up residence there, and now it serves as headquarters for an international criminal operation that has the WSB's full attention. Every room could be monitored, every conversation potentially recorded, and every visitor assessed as either an asset or a threat. Yet despite these dangers, or perhaps because of them, Jocelyn can't simply avoid Windermere altogether. How else is she supposed to fulfill Brennan's mandate to get closer to Lucas? Casual visits to General Hospital during his shifts won't provide the access she needs. Brief conversations during his lunch break might maintain their familial connection, but they won't give her opportunities to observe the broader picture of Sidwell's organization. She needs to see Lucas in his new environment, watch how Marco interacts with his father, and witness the subtle exchanges that reveal criminal intent. Here's the cruel irony of Jocelyn's assignment. Lucas himself isn't even the primary target. He's collateral, an innocent pawn who happens to be dating the son of a crime boss. Marco Rios represents the real objective, the WSB's entry point into Sidwell's inner sanctum. Jocelyn's relationship with Lucas simply provides plausible deniability for her presence at Windermere. She's there visiting her cousin, not conducting surveillance. She's concerned about his new boyfriend, not gathering evidence of international crimes. Every family dinner, every casual hangout, every seemingly innocent conversation becomes a data collection opportunity disguised as quality time. The Pascal connection deepens the conspiracy. Jocelyn's understanding of the threat landscape expanded dramatically when she learned about Pascal's involvement in Sidwell's operations. These aren't just two criminals operating in parallel, they're actively coordinating their activities, and their connection runs deeper than anyone initially realized. The revelation that both men had Brett Westburn held captive in a Croatian basement laboratory conducting mysterious research transformed this from a standard organized crime investigation into something far more sinister. The laboratory situation raises disturbing questions about what exactly Sidwell and Pascal are developing. Britt's medical expertise suggests they weren't manufacturing street drugs or counterfeiting currency. They needed a doctor with specialized knowledge for something more sophisticated. The connection to Professor Henry Hank Dalton adds another layer of intrigue to this puzzle. What does an academic have to do with whatever biomedical project they forced Britt to work on? How does it all tie back to Port Charles? Pascal's presence in Port Charles isn't coincidental. He's here for a reason, and his interest in the local players suggests he's either recruiting new assets or eliminating threats to their operation. Jocelyn recognizes that Pascal knows exactly who she is. Her involvement in the Five Poppies incident overseas ensured she ended up on multiple international watch lists. She can't slip under his radar no matter how carefully she conducts this operation. Pascal will be watching her every move, analyzing her behavior, and waiting for her to make a mistake that exposes her true purpose. The question that haunts Jocelyn late at night is whether Pascal has already briefed Sidwell about her WSB connections. If so, every visit to Windermere becomes theater, with both sides pretending ignorance while maneuvering for advantage. Sidwell might even welcome her presence, using her as a test to see how much the WSB knows about his operations. The surveillance could flow in both directions, with Jocelyn gathering intelligence on Sidwell while he simultaneously studies how the WSB operates and what gaps exist in their knowledge. Marco's hidden complicity. Perhaps the most dangerous element of this entire situation is one Jocelyn hasn't fully grasped yet. Marco isn't an innocent bystander to his father's criminal empire. He's not some naive son who remains blissfully unaware of how daddy makes his money. Marco is complicit, actively involved in Sidwell's operations in ways that Jocelyn won't discover until it's almost too late. This blind spot in her intelligence could prove catastrophic not just for the mission, but for Lucas's safety. The WSB's intelligence gathering apparently missed this crucial detail. Assuming Marco was either kept in the dark about family business or maintained plausible deniability while enjoying the fruits of his father's illegal enterprises. This miscalculation means Jocelyn is walking into a situation far more dangerous than she realizes. She thinks she's watching Marco to learn about Sidwell, not recognizing that Marco is watching her right back with full awareness of what she represents. When Sidwell eventually informs Marco that Jocelyn is secretly working for the WSB, and make no mistake, that conversation is coming, the power dynamic shifts dramatically. Marco and his father will gain the upper hand in every interaction, able to feed Jocelyn false information, mislead her surveillance efforts, and potentially use her to identify other WSB assets in the region. They might even engineer situations specifically designed to compromise her, forcing her to choose between maintaining her cover and protecting her family. The approaching breaking point. Every agent has a breaking point, and Sidwell is experienced enough to know exactly how to find Jocelyn's. She might be trained in tradecraft and surveillance techniques, but she's also young, emotionally invested in the people around her, and unaccustomed to the moral compromises required for deep cover work. Sidwell and Pascal won't just threaten her directly, that's too crude and leaves too much evidence. Instead, they'll engineer situations that force Jocelyn to watch her family suffer while she maintains her cover, gradually cranking up the psychological pressure until something snaps. Lucas represents the perfect pressure point. As he falls deeper in love with Marco and becomes more integrated into the Windermere household, he unknowingly places himself in greater danger. Jocelyn will have to watch this happen in real time, powerless to intervene without blowing her cover and facing those treason charges Brennan threatened her with. The emotional toll of this surveillance assignment could push her to make desperate choices, compromising her position to protect the people she loves. The question that looms over everything is whether Jocelyn can maintain her composure long enough to complete this mission without destroying her family relationships or ending up in federal prison. Brennan's treason threats weren't empty rhetoric. The WSB takes security breaches seriously, and unauthorized disclosure of classified information carries severe consequences. If Jocelyn warns Lucas about Marco or reveals details about Sidwell's operations to protect her cousin, she faced prosecution under the Espionage Act with potential decades in prison. Yet staying silent and watching Lucas walk deeper into danger might prove equally impossible for someone with Jocelyn's moral compass. She joined the WSB to protect innocent people, not to use them as unwitting intelligence assets. This mission forces her to confront the ugly reality of espionage work. Sometimes protecting national security requires sacrificing individual innocence. Sometimes the mission matters more than any single person's safety. Sometimes agents have to make choices that haunt them for the rest of their lives. The walls are closing in from multiple directions now. Pascal and Sidwell know who she is. Marco is about to learn the truth. Lucas remains blissfully unaware of the danger surrounding him. And Brennan expects results without caring about the human cost of obtaining them. Something has to give, and when it does, the fallout will reshape Port Charles's landscape in ways no one can fully predict.
Thanks for watching, guys. See you soon. Bye.